Fela Anikulapo Kuti has remained a towering figure in Nigerian history. It's been close to 30 years since his passing, and yet we continue to talk about Fela today. The question is, why is Fela so important that we continue to talk about him even today? Now, I should say that Fela is multidimensional. It is almost impossible for you to condense him into a single characterization because Fela invented a musical genre. Fela was an activist. He was extremely persecuted by the Nigerian state. Fela, to an extent, could be said to be a paradox because on the one hand, he condemned systemic corruption while himself contributed to some kind of degeneracy in society with his promotion of marijuana, with his constant womanizing. Now Fela could be said to be a philosopher. Some see him as a prophet of sorts. So Fela is many things, But the real question is, why have we continued to talk about Fela today? Now, this book, Arrest the Music, might give an answer to that question. Because reading this book, I got to understand the impressive metamorphosis Fela experienced throughout his 3-decade career. Very, very impressive. Now, it would interest you to know that the Fela you and I know today, that radical Fela that you and I know, wasn't always like that way. There was a time in his career Fela never cared about politics. He never cared about societal issues. He just wanted to hustle like every other musician. Now, before Fela left for college in 1958, Fela had a stint playing for Victor Olaya's band. Victor Olaya is one of the legends of highlife music. Now, at the time, highlife was a dominant music in West Africa, in Anglophone West African countries, actually. And so Fela also wanted to play highlife like every other person. Now, even when he left for college in London, he formed a highlife band. Because, like I said, he wanted to play highlife. But in London, he was exposed to jazz. He fell in love with the fact that jazz was more refined than highlife. And so the absolute love he had for jazz, he brought it back to Nigeria. And yet, our life was still huge in Nigeria. And he knew that Nigeria was just not the market for jazz. And so if he wanted to play jazz and jazz alone, he would be committing a career. And so eventually, he thought of synchronizing jazz and highlife together. During this phase, the kind of music Fela did was called highlife jazz. But the truth of the matter is, even Fela's highlife jazz was more jazz than highlife, And so during the intervening years he played highlife jazz, he didn't get that fame. He didn't get that acclaim, And so he kept on struggling with his band. Now, until 1969, when he left for the US with his band for a cultural residency. It was during this time he met Sandra Smith. Sandra Smith was a former member of the Black Panther movement, a black civil rights movement. So it was through meeting Sandra, he was introduced to the civil rights movement. He read about Malcolm X. He read Malcolm X's biography, actually. I would say Malcolm X's biography was the most radicalizing thing that happened to Fela. Meeting Sandra really gave him the kind of epiphany he needed. And so he thought that he needed to come up with a uniquely African sound. All along, he had just been experimenting with different sounds, but he felt those sounds were not depictive of the African essence enough. And so eventually, he was just sitting by the piano someday, and then he began to, experiment with this and experiment with that. And so he came up with a unique sound. Now, that sound, it turns out to be a fusion of highlife, of chants, of Yoruba rhythm, of jazz, and of course of funky pop. So he fused everything together, and the fusion of all that came to be known as the original Afrobeat sound. Matter of fact, the first Afrobeat song Fela would produce is titled My Lady Frustration. Now, that experience would turn out to be the most defining experience in Fela's career. That redefining experience shaped Fela's career going forward. And so Fela that we know today as the inventor of Afrobeat was radicalized while he was in the US. And after that, he consciously sang about the African experience. He consciously sang about black identity. He consciously sang about while Africans are suffering. He sang songs against the Nigerian government. He sang songs against dictatorships, and on and on and on. Now, of course, singing against the powers that be would definitely lead to persecution. And I read a fact somewhere that Fela became the most persecuted musician in history. I think he was arrested more than 200 times. You know, think about that. So, in all of this, the story of Fela is such of grit, is such of metamorphosis, is such of ideology, and is such of complexity. So, and I think that is why Fela has remained relevant even today. Now, there's an interesting question I like to ask though. The music we sing today in Nigeria is called Afrobeats with the S. Now, do you think Afrobeats with the S shares any semblance with Fela's Afrobeat? Let me know in the comment section. I'll see you guys in the next one.